The barking started like thunder in a clear sky. Maverick, the German Shepherd K9 unit with scars hidden beneath his tan and black coat, suddenly froze mid-demonstration, his ears perked forward, body tensing as if confronting an invisible enemy. Officer Marcus Reed felt the leash go tight. "Maverick, heel," he commanded. But the dog was beyond commands now. 8-year-old Lily Thompson watched, wide-eyed, as the police dog charged across the cafeteria, nails clicking frantically against linoleum, before stopping at the far corner where the serving line met the wall. The barking intensified, not the controlled alerts from the demonstration moments earlier, but frenzied, desperate sounds that echoed off institutional walls. "Everyone stay back," Officer Reed called as students and teachers pressed against walls. Maverick began digging at the floor, his powerful paws scraping at a seam in the vinyl that nobody had noticed before. Something gave way, a floorboard, shifting to reveal darkness beneath. And just like that, Westlake Elementary's forgotten secrets began to surface. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Maverick hadn't always been a police dog. 4 years earlier, he'd been racing through the dusty terrain of Afghanistan, leading a patrol unit when the IED detonated. The explosion that killed his handler, Staff Sergeant Michael Collins, left Maverick with shrapnel embedded in his left hind leg and invisible wounds that ran deeper than flesh. Military vets deemed him too traumatized for continued service, marking him for euthanasia until Officer Marcus Reed intervened, recognizing something in the broken animal that mirrored his own pain. "That dog's got fight left in him," Marcus had insisted to the skeptical K9 training officers. "Just needs someone who understands what he's been through." What Marcus understood was loss, the kind that hollows you from the inside. His sister Sarah had vanished from a playground 30 years ago when he was just 12. Her case eventually going cold despite his father's position on the police force. That unresolved absence had guided Marcus into law enforcement, and now into the life of a damaged shepherd who'd lost his purpose. Lily Thompson understood loss too, though hers was still raw. 2 years had passed since her mother's car had been hit by a drunk driver, but time hadn't dulled the ache. She'd stopped speaking to anyone outside her father for months afterward, retreating into silence as though words were too precious to waste on a world that had taken her mother. The move to Portland was supposed to be a fresh start, her father, Nathan, taking a position teaching 8th grade science at Westlake Elementary, while Lily enrolled as a 3rd grader. Principal Eleanor Whitman had welcomed them warmly, her matronly exterior and reputation for running a tight ship giving Nathan confidence in the choice. What he couldn't have known was how her husband's cancer treatments had drained their savings, leaving Eleanor vulnerable to pressures she'd never imagined facing in her 30 years of education. The aging Mr. Johnson had been Westlake's custodian since before any current staff member's tenure. At 72, his stooped figure was as much a fixture of the school as the faded mural in the entrance hall. "Buildings have memories," he'd told Lily on her first day when he found her hiding in the library during recess. "Sometimes they keep secrets, too." None of them could have guessed how prophetic those words would prove, or how their lives would intertwine in the darkness beneath the school's foundations. Career Day at Westlake Elementary had been Principal Whitman's idea, an opportunity for students to imagine futures beyond their neighborhood's modest boundaries. The gymnasium buzzed with excitement as 3rd graders rotated between stations staffed by doctors, firefighters, electricians, and a nervous-looking Nathan Thompson, who demonstrated simple chemical reactions that produced colorful smoke and harmless sparks. Officer Marcus Reed's station, however, drew the largest crowd. The children pressed forward, eager for a closer look at Maverick, who sat alert beside his handler, his intelligent eyes scanning the crowd with professional detachment. "This is Officer Maverick," Reed explained, his hand resting on the shepherd's head. "He's what we call a dual-purpose K9. He helps find missing people and detects substances that might be dangerous." A freckle-faced boy raised his hand. "Has he ever bitten a bad guy?" Reed smiled patiently. "Maverick is trained to apprehend suspects when necessary, but his nose is his most valuable tool. Today, we're going to show you how he finds hidden objects." The demonstration proceeded smoothly at first. Reed had hidden several training scent packets throughout the gym, and Maverick found each one methodically, sitting proudly beside each discovery as the children applauded. It was during the third search that Reed noticed Lily Thompson standing slightly apart from the other children, her eyes following Maverick with unusual intensity. When the shepherd passed near her, he paused, nostrils flaring as he briefly nuzzled her hand. The gesture was so uncharacteristic that Reed made a mental note Maverick rarely initiated contact with strangers, especially children, whose unpredictable movements often made him uneasy. "He likes you," Reed told her. "That's pretty special." Lily's response was barely audible. "My mom liked dogs. The final demonstration was meant to be simple, finding a training aid hidden in the cafeteria across the hall. But as Reed unclipped the lead to give Maverick the search command, the dog suddenly stiffened, then bolted through the double doors before Reed could react. By the time the officer caught up, the cafeteria was already in chaos, with Maverick's frantic barking drowning out the staff's attempts to restore order. Only Lily had followed quietly, slipping in through a side entrance unnoticed in the confusion. She watched from behind a trash can as Maverick tore at the floor near the service line, exposing what appeared to be a seam in the vinyl flooring. When Reed finally managed to grab Maverick's collar, the dog had already pried loose what was clearly a disguised trapdoor, revealing the first few rungs of a ladder descending into darkness. "Everybody out," Reed ordered, radio already in hand to call for backup. The cafeteria staff herded protesting children toward the exits, but Lily remained hidden, her curiosity overcoming the anxiety that normally kept her silent and invisible. When the room had emptied, except for Reed, Maverick, and the hidden Lily, the officer knelt to examine the opening, shining his flashlight into the space below. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered to Maverick. "The building plans don't show any access points here." Lily's small voice startled him. "Mr. Johnson says there are tunnels everywhere underneath, from when it was a hospital." Reed turned, surprised. "Lily? Right. You shouldn't be in here. It could be dangerous." "Maverick wanted to show you," she said simply, as though this explained everything. Before Reed could respond, the cafeteria doors swung open and Principal Whitman hurried in, her normally composed face tight with concern. "Officer Reed, what's happening? The children are saying something about a hole in my cafeteria floor." Reed stood, positioning himself subtly between the principal and the exposed opening. "Ma'am, are you aware of any basement access points in this area of the building?" The slight tremor in Whitman's hand as she adjusted her glasses might have gone unnoticed by most, but not by Reed, whose career had taught him to recognize the tiny tells of concealed knowledge. "That's impossible," she said. "Those old tunnels were sealed off decades ago when the building was renovated for school use." As if responding to the falsehood, Maverick growled low in his throat, causing the principal to take an involuntary step backward. By the time the school day ended, additional officers had secured the area, and parents collected their children amid whispered speculations. Reed had called in a structural engineer to assess the safety of the opening before further exploration, insisting that proper procedure be followed despite his burning curiosity. In the parking lot, Lily climbed into her father's weathered Honda Civic, unusually animated as she described the day's events. Nathan listened with growing concern, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "Did anyone go down into the tunnel?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lily shook her head. "Officer Reed said they have to make sure it's safe first. But Maverick really wanted to go down there. Dad, he knew something was wrong." Nathan's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, checking whether they were being followed, a habit he'd developed recently that Lily had noticed but didn't understand. "Sometimes," he said finally, "it's better not to find what's hidden." The next morning, yellow police tape cordoned off the cafeteria entrance as students filed past, whispering excitedly about the mysterious discovery. A small convoy of unmarked police vehicles had arrived before the first bell, and Officer Reed stood conferring with a team of investigators near the main entrance. Maverick sat at attention beside him, his ears constantly swiveling to track every sound. Lily spotted them as her father dropped her off, noticing how Maverick's posture changed when he caught sight of her head lifting, tail giving a single, subtle wag of recognition. "Remember what we talked about?" Nathan said, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Let the police do their job. Don't go wandering off." Lily nodded, but her father's warning only intensified her curiosity. There was something in his voice she rarely heard, the same tension that had appeared when he'd received certain phone calls in their old home, always taken in private. Principal Whitman's voice crackled over the intercom during homeroom, announcing that lunch would be served in classrooms due to maintenance issues in the cafeteria. She assured everyone that normal operations would resume soon, her tone betraying none of the nervous energy Lily had witnessed the previous day. By mid-morning, Lily had devised a plan. When her class lined up for their weekly library visit, she asked for a bathroom pass, then took a circuitous route that brought her within view of the cafeteria. 2 officers guarded the entrance, but the service door leading to the kitchen remained unattended. She slipped inside just as Mr. Johnson emerged from a supply closet, nearly colliding with her. "Whoa there, little lady," the elderly janitor said, steadying himself on his mop handle. "This area's off limits today." "I just wanted to see," Lily admitted, expecting to be escorted back to class. Instead, Mr. Johnson glanced around conspiratorially before leaning down. "Curious minds are how truths get uncovered. My daddy used to tell me that." He tapped his nose. "But timing matters. Come back during lunch period, they'll all be down there then, and the door'll be unguarded." Lily blinked in surprise. "You're not going to tell me to stay away?" The old man's weathered face crinkled into a maze of wrinkles. "Some things need witnessing, even by young eyes, especially by young eyes. The school's been keeping secrets too long." He straightened up with a grimace. "Now scoot before someone sees you." True to Mr. Johnson's prediction, when Lily returned during lunch, the police presence had shifted to the cafeteria floor, voices echoing up from the opening. She crept to the edge, lying flat to peer down into what appeared to be a concrete passageway illuminated by flashlights. Officer Reed's voice carried clearly from below. "These definitely aren't on any building plans I've seen." These tunnels look recently used, no dust accumulation you'd expect in a sealed space. Another voice, unfamiliar, authoritative, responded. Military hospitals in that era often had escape routes or storage areas built below ground. But this? A pause. This has been modified. Recently. Maverick's distinctive bark echoed from deeper within the tunnel system, followed by Reed calling out. He's found something. Lily pulled back as footsteps approached the ladder from below. She concealed herself behind a serving counter just as Officer Reed emerged, followed by a taller officer whose nameplate read Bennett. Maverick came next, pulling hard at his leash as he climbed the rungs with surprising agility. "Wade, we need forensics down there now," Reed was saying, reaching for his radio. "There's equipment. Files, this isn't some forgotten storage room." Officer Bennett Wade placed a restraining hand on Reed's arm. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Could be just school records they moved down there during renovations. We need to process this by the book." Maverick growled softly, his attention fixed on Wade in a way that seemed different from his usual alertness. Reed noticed too, giving his partner a curious look before speaking into his radio. The voices faded as they exited, but Lily remained hidden, heart pounding. Only when she was certain they were gone did she creep back to the opening. The ladder descended about 15 feet to a concrete floor. Light still glowed from somewhere deeper in the tunnel they'd left equipment behind. The sensible part of her brain screamed to retreat, but something stronger pulled her forward. Before she could reconsider, she was descending the ladder, her small hands gripping each rung tightly. The tunnel was surprisingly dry and well-maintained, nothing like the crumbling passages she'd imagined. The walls were painted institutional green, with electrical conduits running along the ceiling. She followed the light source to a room about 30 feet from the access point. What she found made her stomach clench. The room contained a desk with modern computer equipment, filing cabinets, and walls covered with photographs of children Westlake students. She recognized several faces, including 3 kids who had supposedly transferred to other schools mid-year. Beside each photo were notes, abbreviations she didn't understand, Class 3A. Potential. Verified. A sound from the tunnel sent her scrambling beneath the desk. Heavy footsteps approached, and she pulled her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. "I thought I heard something down here." A man's voice said her father's voice. Lily's breath caught. What was her father doing here? How did he know about the tunnels? She was about to reveal herself when another voice responded, "Probably just settling noises. These old structures make all kinds of sounds." It was Principal Whitman. "We need to remove the most sensitive materials immediately. If they connect these records to the operation—" "It's too late," Nathan replied. "They've already seen enough to bring in forensics. We need to accelerate the timetable." "That's not your decision to make," Whitman snapped. "We follow protocol unless instructed otherwise." Lily remained frozen, unable to process what she was hearing. Her father involved in whatever secret lay beneath the school. The conversation continued as they moved around the room, gathering papers and disconnecting equipment. "The last 3 transfers were processed without issues," Whitman was saying. "No one questioned the paperwork. That Wisconsin operation was compromised last month," Nathan countered. "Security protocols have tightened everywhere. We can't assume—" Their voices cut off abruptly as Maverick's bark echoed from the tunnel entrance. "Police, is someone down there?" Reed's voice called out. The footsteps retreated rapidly away from the main tunnel, and Lily heard a metallic sound, another door opening and closing. When she finally dared to peek out, the room was empty except for items too large to quickly remove. Tears blurred her vision as she tried to make sense of what she'd witnessed. Her father, her only remaining parent, was somehow part of whatever sinister purpose these tunnels served. When Officer Reed and Maverick entered moments later, they found Lily curled beneath the desk, silent tears streaming down her face. "Lily," Reed said gently, kneeling beside her. "What are you doing down here? It's dangerous." Maverick pushed past his handler, pressing his body against the trembling child in an uncharacteristic display of comfort. As Reed coaxed her out, Lily made a decision she wouldn't tell him about her father. Not yet. Not until she understood what was happening. "I heard them talking," she whispered instead. "About student transfers. About an operation." Reed's expression hardened. "Who? Lily, who did you hear?" But Lily only shook her head, burying her face in Maverick's fur as the dog stood protective sentry beside her. The school gymnasium had been converted into a makeshift command center by afternoon. Folding tables replaced basketball equipment, now laden with evidence bags, laptops, and grim-faced officers reviewing materials. Lily sat on a blue plastic chair in the corner, a social worker named Ms. Bryant, attempting to engage her with gentle questions that Lily answered with minimal nods or shakes of her head. Only Maverick seemed able to draw her out of her shell. Reed had brought the shepherd over after noticing how the girl kept looking for him, and now the dog lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head when her fingers stopped their rhythmic stroking of his fur. "It's called trauma bonding," Ms. Bryant explained quietly to Reed when he checked on them. "The dog represents safety to her right now. Whatever she saw down there frightened her deeply." Reed nodded, his eyes tracking Officer Wade Bennett as he directed the evidence cataloging across the room. Something felt off about his partner's handling of the case, his insistence on controlling which officers accessed the tunnel, his hurried removal of certain files before the forensics team arrived. "Has she mentioned her father?" Reed asked. Nathan Thompson had been unreachable since the morning drop-off, his classroom taken over by a substitute with no explanation provided. Ms. Bryant shook her head. "She's protecting someone. It's not uncommon with children who witness domestic situations. They love the person even when they fear what they're doing." Across the gymnasium, Principal Whitman sat rigidly in a similar chair, answering questions from a detective. Her usual commanding presence had diminished, leaving behind a nervous woman who repeatedly adjusted her glasses and asked for clarification on basic questions. When Wade approached her, Reed noticed how she seemed to shrink further, her eyes darting between the officer and the exit. Reed's phone vibrated with a text. "Records room, 10 minutes, alone." The sender was listed only as Johnson. The custodian was waiting when Reed slipped away, his wizened face grave beneath the fluorescent lights. "Been at this school 43 years. Mr. Johnson began without preamble. "Started when they still had the old furnace that needed constant tending. Been watching things long time." "What things, Mr. Johnson?" "Kids that vanish. Not many, one every few years. Always the same pattern. Trouble at home, then sudden transfer. Paperwork all proper. No goodbyes." He shuffled to a filing cabinet, arthritic fingers working the combination lock with practiced ease. "Been keeping my own records. Administration doesn't know?" He extracted a worn leather journal and handed it to Reed. Inside were handwritten entries dating back decades, each detailing a student's circumstances before their abrupt departure. Names, dates, unusual observations. The meticulous documentation of a man who noticed patterns others missed. "Why didn't you report this?" Reed asked, paging through entries that stretched into the current school year. Johnson's laugh was hollow. "Did, first few times. Was told I was an old man with too much imagination. Then things happened. My daughter lost her job at the district office. Grandson's scholarship disappeared. Got the message clear enough." His roomy eyes held Reed's. "But I kept writing it all down. Figured someday someone would listen." Reed tucked the journal into his jacket. "I'm listening now. Then you should know Thompson's been asking questions too. Came to me few weeks back, showing photos of missing kids from his old school in Tacoma. Said patterns matched what he was seeing here." Reed's mind raced, recalibrating his understanding of Nathan Thompson's role. "You're saying he's investigating, not participating." "Can't say for certain. But man looking to hide involvement doesn't usually wave red flags asking about missing children." When Reed returned to the gymnasium, he found Wade interviewing Lily, Maverick tense at her side. The dog's posture was subtly alert, a stance Reed recognized from apprehension scenarios. Officer Bennett was just asking Lily about her father's after-school activities. "Ms. Bryant explained, her tone professionally neutral but her expression concerned. "I need a moment with my partner." Reed interrupted, gesturing Wade away from the girl. Once out of earshot, he kept his voice low. "Since when do we interview minors without guardian consent or proper child services protocols?" Wade's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Since finding evidence of child trafficking, Marcus, her father's fingerprints are all over equipment in that tunnel. Surveillance footage shows him entering the school after hours at least 6 times in the past month." The revelation hit Reed like a physical blow. Despite Johnson's suggestion, part of him had hoped Thompson would be cleared, for Lily's sake. "We're bringing him in as soon as patrol locates him," Wade continued. "Meanwhile, I've been authorized to lead the task force on this. FBI's sending support. But we're primary until they arrive." "What about Lily?" "Foster placement, temporary. Bryant's handling it." Wade clapped Reed's shoulder. "Good work with the dog. By the way, if he hadn't found that entrance, who knows how long this would have continued." As Wade walked away, Reed noticed Maverick watching his partner with the same intensity he reserved for potential threats. In their 3 years together, Reed had learned to trust the shepherd's instincts. Late afternoon brought the first major breakthrough. A tech analyst had recovered deleted files from the tunnel computer, revealing an elaborate system for identifying and profiling potential targets, vulnerable children with minimal family connections, behavioral issues that might explain their absence, or unstable home situations where questions would be limited. "They're selecting kids who won't be missed," the analyst explained, displaying spreadsheets with color-coded risk assessments, "or whose disappearances can be easily explained away." More disturbing were the communications carefully coded emails discussing shipments and processing centers, with references to dates that corresponded with student transfers. The operation extended beyond Westlake, connecting to at least 5 other schools across 3 states. Reed was reviewing these findings when commotion erupted at the gymnasium entrance. Nathan Thompson had arrived not in custody, but in the company of a woman who flashed federal credentials to the officers blocking her path. "Special Agent Catherine Reeves, FBI," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Mr. Thompson is a confidential informant in an ongoing federal investigation. I need to speak with whoever's running this operation immediately." Wade emerged from the evidence area, his expression unreadable as he approached. "Officer Wade Bennett, Portland PD. I'm the task force coordinator." He extended his hand, which Reeves ignored. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" "Officer Bennett, and I'll need all evidence cataloged and secured until our team arrives." Reed watched the exchange with growing unease. Nathan's eyes had locked onto Lily across the room, his face crumpling with relief at seeing her safe. But before he could approach his daughter, Wade smoothly inserted himself, guiding Reeves and Thompson toward the principal's office. "Of course. Agent Reeves, everything by the book." As they departed, Reed crossed to Lily, who had half risen from her chair at the sight of her father. "Was that my dad?" she asked, voice small. "Is he in trouble?" Reed chose his words carefully. "He's helping the FBI with their investigation. Lily, that's all I know right now." Not a lie, but not the complete truth either. Until he understood Thompson's actual role, creating false hope seemed cruel. Maverick whined softly, pressing closer to Lily as tears welled in her eyes. "He wouldn't hurt anybody," she whispered. "He helps people. That's what Mom always said." The simple faith in her voice struck Reed deeply. "Let's find out what's happening." "Okay." He offered his hand, which she took after a moment's hesitation. "Maverick and I could use your help with something important." He led her to a quieter corner where evidence technicians had arranged recovered items from the tunnel. "We found these," he explained, showing her photographs of backpacks and personal items. "We think they belonged to students who left the school. Do you recognize any of them?" Lily studied the images, pointing hesitantly to a purple backpack with unicorn keychains. "That's Zoe's. She was in my class until February. Mrs. Peterson said she moved to Florida." Her finger moved to a Captain America lunchbox. "And that's Miguel's. He didn't say goodbye either. Just didn't come back after spring break." As Lily identified more items, Reed felt a cold certainty forming. The transferred students weren't just database entries, they were real children who had sat in Westlake's classrooms, eaten in its cafeteria, trusted its adults to keep them safe. A memory surfaced Sarah, his sister, climbing onto the school bus the morning she disappeared. Her strawberry shortcake backpack had been new, a birthday gift she'd insisted on carrying everywhere. That backpack had never been found. Reed was pulled from the painful recollection by Maverick's sudden alertness. The shepherd's ears pricked forward, head turning toward the gymnasium doors just before they burst open. Wade strode in, his earlier composure replaced by controlled urgency. "We've got a situation," he announced to the room. "Thompson's gone. Slipped away during debriefing. Agent Reeves is coordinating search efforts, but we need all available personnel." Officers moved immediately, gathering equipment and radioing for backup. Reed approached Wade, Maverick and Lily following close behind. "What happened?" Wade's expression was grave. "He asked to use the restroom, then went out a window." Reeves thinks he's running to destroy evidence at a secondary location. He lowered his voice. They found transaction records, Marcus, kids being sold through an adoption fraud scheme. Thompson's fingerprints were on everything. Reed glanced at Lily, who was picking up on the tension despite not hearing the words. I'll get her settled with Bryant, then join the search. No need, Wade countered. Keep the dog with you and secure the tunnel entrance. Thompson might try to access it again. He knows the layout better than we do. The assignment felt wrong, keeping Reed from the active search. But before he could object, Bryant approached to take Lily to her temporary placement. The girl's face crumpled as she realized she was being separated from both her father and her newfound protectors. "Can't Maverick come with me?" she pleaded. Arms wrapped around the shepherd's neck, Reed knelt to her level. "He needs to help find your dad, Lily, but I promise we'll come to see you as soon as we can." He hesitated, then added, "Your father loves you very much. Remember that." "Okay." She nodded, tears streaming silently as Bryant led her away. Maverick whined, watching until she disappeared through the doors. With the gymnasium emptying of personnel, Reed found himself increasingly isolated, left with only a skeleton crew to process evidence while the manhunt mobilized elsewhere. He used the opportunity to examine materials Wade had, seemed particularly interested in controlling computer logs, surveillance recordings, and communication records. What he found sent ice through his veins. The timestamps on key files had been altered, metadata changed to implicate Thompson while obscuring other participants. More damning were email fragments showing Wade's personal account and communications with Principal Whitman dating back months before the investigation began. Reed was photographing these discrepancies with his phone when Maverick suddenly growled a deep, threatening sound rarely heard outside dangerous confrontations. Reed turned to find Wade standing in the doorway of the evidence room. "Finding anything interesting, partner?" Wade's voice was conversational, but his posture had shifted subtly into something predatory. Reed pocketed his phone with deliberate casualness. "Just being thorough. Something about the timeline seemed off." "Always the detail, man." Wade stepped closer, glancing at the documents Reed had been reviewing. "That's why I requested you for K-9 Division. Knew you'd be useful." The compliment carried an undercurrent that raised Reed's guard further. Maverick moved between them, his body language clearly communicating threat assessment. "Your dog seems agitated," Wade observed. "Might want to get him checked out. Traumatized animals can become unpredictable, dangerous, even." The veiled threat wasn't lost on Reed. "He's fine, just protective." "Of you or Thompson's kid?" Wade's smile thinned. "Got pretty attached to her. Didn't he? Unusual for a dog with his history." The comment confirmed Reed's suspicion that Wade knew more about Maverick's background than he should, details Reed had never shared with his partner. "Children in distress trigger his training," Reed answered carefully. "Speaking of Lily, any word on her father?" "Actually, yes." Wade's hand moved casually toward his holster. "That's why I came to find you. We've located him near the River District. Thought you'd want to be there when we bring him in." Everything in Reed's training screamed danger, but he maintained his neutral expression. "Of course. Let me secure these files and I'll meet you at the vehicle." "No need for that." Wade's hand now rested openly on his weapon. Evidence team can handle it. Why don't we go now? Oh, and leave the dog. Canine support isn't needed for this pickup. The request confirmed Reed's worst fears. Wade was separating him from both evidence and Maverick's standard procedure before eliminating a threat. Actually, Reed said, reaching slowly for Maverick's leash, regulations require canine officers to maintain handler contact during active investigations. Liability issues. The tension between them stretched taut as piano wire until Wade's radio crackled with an update from the search teams. The distraction was momentary, but enough for Reed to clip Maverick's lead and step toward the door. "We should go," he said, allowing Wade to precede him into the hallway. "Don't want to miss the arrest." As they walked through the deserted school corridors, Reed's mind raced through scenarios, each more dangerous than the last. If Wade was involved in the trafficking operation, as the evidence suggested, then Thompson truly was an investigator, not a perpetrator, which meant Lily was now effectively a hostage in foster care, potentially accessible to Wade's network. More chilling was the realization that if Wade suspected Reed had uncovered his involvement, neither of them would likely reach their destination. The school's empty hallways provided ideal conditions for staging an unfortunate incident. Reed's hand brushed his phone, considering his options for alerting backup without Wade noticing. But before he could act, Maverick suddenly stiffened, ears swiveling toward the cafeteria as they passed its closed doors. A muffled sound emerged too faint for human ears to identify clearly, but enough to trigger the shepherd's acute hearing. Without warning, Maverick lunged toward the doors, nearly pulling the leash from Reed's grasp. "What the hell?" Wade's hand moved to his weapon. "Control your dog. Reed." But Maverick was beyond basic commands now, scratching frantically at the cafeteria doors. The same urgent behavior he'd displayed when first discovering the tunnel entrance. Reed recognized the pattern. Maverick had detected something critical. Or someone. "Must be an animal trapped inside," Reed suggested, using the distraction to position himself advantageously. "I should check it out. Protocol for building safety." Wade's expression darkened. "We don't have time for this. The Thompson pickup is priority." But Maverick's frantic pawing had become impossible to ignore, his whines escalating to urgent barks that echoed through the empty hallway. 2 minutes, Reed insisted, already pushing the door open. "Then we'll go." As they entered the darkened cafeteria, emergency lights cast long shadows across upturned chairs and tables pushed against walls for floor cleaning. The tunnel entrance remained cordoned off with police tape, a single officer stationed nearby who straightened at their approach. "All quiet here, sir," the young patrolman reported to Wade. "No activity since the forensics team finished," Wade nodded dismissively. "We're just checking something, then heading out. Resume your position." But Maverick wasn't interested in the tunnel entrance. Instead, he pulled Reed toward the kitchen area, his nose working urgently along the baseboards until he stopped at a metal storage cabinet, pawing at its base while emitting the distinctive alert bark Reed had trained him to use for human scent detection. Someone was hiding in or behind the cabinet. Someone alive. "Probably rats," Wade said, his voice tight. "School this old is probably infested. Let's go." Reed pretended to agree, starting to turn away before giving Maverick the silent hand signal for continued search. The shepherd responded immediately, circling behind the cabinet to an area partially concealed by an industrial mixer. There, barely visible in the dim light, was another hatch, smaller than the tunnel entrance, easily overlooked among the kitchen equipment, and it was partially open, The discovery of the second hatch changed everything in an instant. Reed maintained his casual stance, fighting every instinct that screamed for him to investigate immediately. "You're right," he told Wade, tugging Maverick's leash as though to leave. "Probably just rodents. Let's head out." But Maverick had locked onto the scent now, refusing to budge despite Reed's commands. The shepherd's behavior was no longer something Reed could plausibly control or explain away. Wade's expression darkened. Quite the coincidence. Finding another access point. Almost like someone told you where to look. His hand moved to his weapon, no longer bothering with pretense. "Who have you been talking to?" "Marcus." The young patrolman watching the main tunnel entrance had noticed the tension, his hand hovering uncertainly near his own holster. "Everything okay, sir?" "Officer Reed and I are handling a sensitive aspect of the investigation," Wade called back, his voice professionally calm, while his eyes remained fixed on Reed. "Continue securing the main entrance." Reed calculated his options, each more dangerous than the last. If he drew his weapon, he'd be escalating against a fellow officer with no proof of wrongdoing, potentially ending his career, or worse. If Wade was truly involved in the trafficking operation. However, the consequences of inaction could be far more devastating. The decision was made for him when a muffled sound came from beneath the hatch, not quite a voice, but clearly human. Maverick's barking intensified, and in the split second that Wade's attention shifted toward the sound, Reed acted. "Code Blue, kitchen area. Officer needs assistance," he shouted toward the patrolman, using the department's signal for non-lethal emergency backup. Simultaneously, he gave Maverick the command they'd practiced countless times. "Maverick, hold." The shepherd launched himself at Wade with controlled precision, not biting, but using his weight to knock the officer off balance, pinning him against the industrial refrigerator. The patrolman rushed forward, confusion evident on his young face as he tried to process the sight of two officers in apparent conflict. "He's involved," Reed said quickly, keeping his hands visible. "Check my phone evidence of tampering, communications with Principal Whitman, and there's someone in that hatch." To the patrolman's credit, he didn't immediately take sides, instead maintaining distance with his hand near his weapon. "Both of you stand down. Backup is already on the way." Wade's laugh held no humor. "Listen to yourself. Marcus, you sound deranged. Finding one tunnel has you seeing conspiracies everywhere." His voice shifted to a command tone. "Officer Davis, control the K-9 and detain Reed. He's compromising an active federal investigation." The moment balanced on a knife's edge until Maverick's barking abruptly ceased, his attention riveted to the hatch, which had begun to move. All three officers froze as the metal panel slowly lifted, revealing a pair of trembling hands followed by a face streaked with dirt and desperation. Nathan Thompson pulled himself halfway out of the opening, freezing when he registered the scene before him. "Don't shoot," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "There's a child down here." Reed reacted instantly, moving toward Thompson while maintaining awareness of Wade's position. "Where is the child hurt?" "Hiding in a side passage. Says her name is Zoe Miller. Been missing 3 weeks." Nathan's gaze locked onto Wade with undisguised recognition. "She says he's the one who took her." Everything accelerated into chaos. Wade drew his weapon with practiced speed, but Maverick was faster, lunging forward in full protection mode. The shepherd's jaws clamped around Wade's wrist with precise pressure enough to immobilize without severing tendons. Exactly as he'd been trained. Wade's gun clattered to the floor as he screamed in pain and rage. Officer Davis drew his weapon, shouting commands that were lost in the confusion as Reed pulled Nathan clear of the hatch opening while simultaneously directing Maverick. "Radio for medical and additional units," Reed ordered Davis, who hesitated only briefly before complying, seemingly convinced by the genuine shock and pain in Wade's reaction. With Wade temporarily neutralized and backup summoned, Reed turned his attention to the hatch. "Zoe," he called into the darkness. "My name is Officer Reed. I'm here to help you. Are you hurt?" A small voice responded, so faint he nearly missed it. "He said he'd come back for me." "You're safe now," Reed assured her, though his racing mind questioned whether that was true. If Wade was involved, how deep did the conspiracy go? Who else in the department might be compromised? "Can you come to the ladder? I'll help you up." After agonizing seconds, a small figure appeared below a girl perhaps 9 years old, with matted hair and clothes that hung from her thin frame. Reed reached down, lifting her easily from the passage. She weighed almost nothing, her bones prominent beneath his hands. Nathan moved forward instinctively to help, but froze when Davis swung his weapon toward him. "Stay where you are," the young officer ordered, clearly overwhelmed by the rapidly evolving situation. "He's FBI," Reed explained quickly, setting Zoe gently on her feet while keeping a protective arm around her shoulders. "Undercover investigation. Wade is involved in the trafficking operation." Davis's eyes darted between them, indecision written across his face until the cafeteria doors burst open, admitting a swarm of officers with weapons drawn, followed by Agent Reeves and a medical team. "Officer Wade is injured but contained," Reed reported immediately, positioning himself to shield both Zoe and Nathan. "We've recovered a missing child and discovered a secondary tunnel access. I have evidence on my phone linking Wade to the operation." The next hour passed in controlled chaos. Zoe was whisked away by paramedics, her small hand clutching Reed's briefly before reluctantly letting go. Nathan provided Agent Reeves with information about the tunnel system's extensions beyond what had been mapped, while tactical teams prepared for further exploration. Wade, his wrist bandaged and his expression murderous, was led away in handcuffs, loudly proclaiming his innocence and demanding legal representation. Reed found himself sequestered in a classroom with Reeves and her team. His phone connected to their equipment as technicians extracted and verified the evidence he'd discovered. "Thompson has been working with us for 14 months, Reeves explained, her clipped tone conveying both urgency and exhaustion. His daughter's classmate disappeared from their previous school in Tacoma. Pattern matching led us to similar cases across the Pacific Northwest. We placed him here at Westlake after identifying it as a probable transit point." "Why wasn't local law enforcement informed?" Reed asked, stroking Maverick's fur as the shepherd rested at his feet, finally calm after the confrontation. Reeves's expression hardened. "Because we've identified law enforcement involvement in 3 jurisdictions already. We couldn't risk compromising the operation." Her gaze softened slightly. "For what it's worth, your name was cleared early in our background checks. That's why Thompson approached your custodian. He thought you might be receptive if presented with enough evidence." The revelation that he'd been investigated without his knowledge stung. But Reed pushed aside the feeling to focus on more immediate concerns. "What about Lily Thompson's daughter?" already retrieved from emergency foster placement and in protective custody with our agents. She's safe. Reeves checked her watch. Which brings me to our current situation. We've been monitoring encrypted communications since Wade's arrest. There's significant chatter suggesting a cleanup operation is being mobilized. Reed straightened. They're going to try to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Precisely. And based on the timeline, it's happening tonight. We believe Principal Whitman was instructed to access school records and destroy specific documentation before the FBI forensics team arrives tomorrow. She pulled up a diagram of the school on her tablet. More concerning, we've identified references to a package pending transfer. We believe that's code for a child scheduled for trafficking. Tonight, Reed felt cold dread settling in his stomach. Do we know which student? Not yet. But the communications reference final processing in the lower facility at 11 p.m. Reed checked the time just past 8:30. Less than 3 hours to identify the target and secure all access points to the tunnel system. I should get Maverick ready for search operations. Reeves nodded, already turning to coordinate with her team. Gear up, briefing in 15 minutes. As Reed led Maverick outside for a quick break, the shepherd's behavior shifted head-lifting, nose working the early evening air with renewed interest. Following the dog's gaze, Reed spotted Mr. Johnson sitting alone on a bench near the playground, his stooped figure silhouetted against the sunset. "You've been watching this place a long time," Reed said. Approaching the elderly custodian, Johnson didn't look up. "Told myself I was protecting the children by staying, keeping an eye out. Truth is, I was too scared to do what needed doing." His weathered hands trembled slightly. Cowardice dressed up as vigilance. Reed sat beside him, Maverick settling at their feet. "You kept records. Those will help build the case. Too little. Too late for some." Johnson finally raised his eyes, revealing unshed tears. "Your sister was one of them. Wasn't she? The little girl who went missing in '92. The question hit Reed like a physical blow. "How did you know about Sarah?" "Wasn't sure until I saw your reaction just now. But they had a photo, down in those tunnels. Police report with it. Your daddy was an officer, made quite the fuss when she disappeared. Made them nervous." He sighed deeply. "They keep records of their close calls, trophies, almost." The implication was sickening. Wade was involved back then. Not Wade. He came later, but same operation, different faces. Johnson leaned closer. "Listen to me. Officer Reed. They've got hiding places in those tunnels you won't find on any blueprint. During Prohibition, rum runners built false walls, secret passages. During the Cold War, they expanded for emergency shelter purposes. The school board sealed most access points in the '80s, but contractors cut corners, left the infrastructure intact. Do you know where these hidden areas are?" Johnson nodded slowly. "Been here since I was 29 years old. Seen every renovation, every improvement. Know this building better than my own home." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a hand-drawn map with annotations in shaky handwriting. "Memorize this, then destroy it, and check the art supply closet in room 118. That's where they keep the key to the North Tunnel access." Reed studied the map, committing the details to memory before returning it. "Why are you telling me this now?" The old man's smile held no joy. Because I'm tired of being afraid. And because that little girl, Lily, she reminds me of all the ones I didn't help." He stood with effort. "Better go now. They'll be watching for unusual movements." As Johnson shuffled away, Reed realized the custodian had given him more than information. He'd provided a chance to close a circle that had begun with Sarah's disappearance 3 decades earlier. The FBI briefing was concise and sobering. Surveillance had identified Principal Whitman entering the school 20 minutes earlier, using her administrative access despite the building being officially closed for the investigation. Thermal imaging suggested additional persons already inside the tunnel system, accessed through entry points outside the school perimeter. Based on communication intercepts, we believe they're preparing to move a child through the tunnel system to a waiting vehicle. Reeves explained to the assembled team. The rendezvous point appears to be an access tunnel that emerges half a mile from the school, near Westbrook Park. Reed indicated a section on their tactical map. There should be additional access points here, and here, according to the building's original plans. He deliberately omitted the locations Johnson had shared, keeping that information in reserve. Tactical assignments proceeded rapidly. Reed and Maverick would join the primary entry team through the cafeteria access point, while secondary teams would secure external entrances and the presumed exit point at Westbrook Park. Nathan Thompson, despite protests, was ordered to remain with the command unit, his knowledge of the operation valuable, but his emotional investment a potential liability. As they prepared to move out, Reed took a moment to check on Lily, who had been brought to a secure area in the administrative offices. He found her sitting quietly beside an agent, Maverick immediately perking up at the sight of her. "Is my dad okay?" she asked without preamble. Reed knelt to her level. "He's fine. He's been helping the FBI investigate some bad people. And he did a very brave thing today." Her small face remained serious. "The people who took Zoe—" "That's right." Reed hesitated, balancing truth against protection. "We think they might try to take another student tonight. Maverick and I are going to stop them." Lily reached out to stroke Maverick's fur, her fingers finding the places behind his ears that the shepherd particularly enjoyed. "He was a soldier dog before, wasn't he? That's why he has scars." "Yes, he was. He protected his handler and his team in Afghanistan." "Did his handler die?" The directness of the question, delivered with a child's unfiltered curiosity, momentarily startled Reed. "Yes. His name was Staff Sergeant Collins. Maverick tried very hard to save him." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Like my dad tried to save my mom in the car accident. Sometimes you can't, even when you try your hardest." Her eyes met Reed's with surprising steadiness. "Maverick still feels sad about it. I can tell." The insight from an 8-year-old struck Reed deeply. "I think you're right, but he's found a new purpose now. Helping you catch bad guys." Lily's hand moved to the shepherd's scarred hind leg. "Does it still hurt him sometimes? On cold days? Or when he remembers?" She leaned forward, whispering something in Maverick's ear that Reed couldn't catch. The shepherd remained perfectly still, as though listening intently, before gently licking her cheek once. "He'll keep you safe," Lily said to Reed with complete certainty. "He promised me." The simple faith in her voice steeled Reed's resolve as he rejoined the tactical team. Maverick seemed to sense the shift in purpose as well, his demeanor changing from gentle companion to focused working dog as they approached the tunnel entrance. The operation began precisely at 10:15 p.m. 3 teams entered the tunnel system simultaneously while perimeter units secured above-ground access points. Reed and Maverick led Alpha Team through the cafeteria entrance, moving silently along the main passage with tactical lights illuminating their way. The tunnel system was more extensive than initially mapped, with branches leading in multiple directions. At the first junction, Reed signaled for Maverick to take the lead, giving the Shepherd the search command for human scent. Without hesitation, Maverick turned left, leading them deeper into the labyrinth. The walls changed from institutional green to bare concrete as they moved away from the original section, dust and debris suggesting less frequent use. Yet Maverick continued confidently, his training allowing him to distinguish between old scent trails and recent human presence. They had progressed approximately 200 yards when Maverick suddenly stopped, his posture indicating detection, but his behavior changing from eager pursuit to cautious assessment. Reed signaled the team to hold position as he moved forward with Maverick, the Shepherd now moving in the professional crawl he'd been taught for approaching potential threats. The tunnel widened into what appeared to be a storage area, cement pillars supporting the ceiling while creating shadowed alcoves. From somewhere ahead came the murmur of voices, a woman's strained tones, followed by a man's curt response. Reed recognized Principal Whitman's distinctive cadence, her words becoming clearer as they advanced. "I told you it's too dangerous now. The FBI has the building secured. Plans have accelerated." The male voice was unfamiliar, its tone leaving no room for argument. "The package will be transitioned tonight as scheduled. The extraction team is already en route to the southern access point." Reed signaled the team's communications officer, who relayed the information to command. Moments later, confirmation came through their earpieces that Bravo Team was redirecting to the southern tunnel section to intercept the extraction team. "What about Wade?" Whitman asked, fear evident in her voice. "Contained for now. His legal team will ensure minimal cooperation. The operation will relocate and continue." The casual dismissal of the entire investigation sent cold anger through Reed. Years of trafficking children, treated as a minor business disruption rather than the destruction of young lives. Maverick sensed his handler's tension, pressing briefly against Reed's leg in what had become their silent communication of mutual support. The gesture centered Reed, bringing his focus back to the tactical situation. He signaled the team to prepare for entry, indicating positions around the storage area's perimeter. On his mark, they would move simultaneously to secure Whitman and her unknown accomplice, hopefully without alerting others who might be deeper in the tunnel system. But as Reed began the countdown, a child's frightened cry echoed from beyond the storage area, followed by sounds of struggle. Tactical discipline gave way to immediate response. Reed and Maverick moved first, rounding the final pillar to find Principal Whitman standing beside a man in dark tactical clothing, both turning in surprise at the sudden intrusion. Behind them, a second man was restraining a struggling child, a boy of about 10, with terror evident on his face. "FBI, freeze!" Reed shouted as the team flooded into the space, weapons trained on the adults. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The man in tactical gear reached for a weapon at his hip, prompting immediate response from the entry team. Shots echoed deafeningly in the confined space. Principal Whitman screamed, dropping to the ground and covering her head. The armed man staggered backward, wounded, but still dangerous. Reed focused on the child, who remained in the grasp of the second kidnapper. "Maverick, protect," he commanded, sending the shepherd charging forward with precise purpose. The kidnapper drew a knife, holding it threateningly near the boy's throat. "Back off, or I'll cut him." But Maverick had been trained for exactly such scenarios. The shepherd didn't attack directly, instead circling to create distraction while remaining just beyond striking distance. The tactic worked. The kidnapper's attention split between the approaching tactical team and the unpredictable dog. In that moment of division, the boy showed remarkable courage, stomping hard on his captor's instep and twisting sideways. The movement created just enough space for Maverick to dart in, clamping powerful jaws around the man's knife arm and dragging him away from the child. Reed rushed forward, securing the boy and pulling him to safety as the team subdued both kidnappers. Principal Whitman remained frozen in place, her earlier defiance replaced by shocked resignation as agents secured her as well. "Are you hurt?" Reed asked the boy, quickly checking for injuries. The child shook his head, eyes wide and fixed on Maverick, who had released the kidnapper and returned to Reed's side, blood darkening the fur around his muzzle where the knife had caught him in the struggle. "That dog saved me," the boy whispered, reaching tentatively toward Maverick. "That's his job," Reed replied, allowing the shepherd to accept the child's grateful pats despite protocol typically discouraging civilian contact with working dogs. Some rules mattered less than healing. The radio crackled with updates. Bravo team had intercepted 3 additional suspects at the southern access point, while Charlie team had secured the exit near Westbrook Park, capturing a waiting transport vehicle with modified hidden compartments. The operation was a success, but Reed felt little triumph as he led the rescued boy identified as Carson Phillips, a 4th grader from Westlake who had been reported absent due to family emergency that morning, back through the tunnels toward safety. Too many children had passed through these same passages before federal intervention. How many hadn't been saved? As they emerged from the tunnel into the cafeteria, Reed was surprised to find Nathan and Lily Thompson waiting with Agent Reeves, both breaking protocol by being present during an active operation. Lily broke away from her father as soon as she spotted Maverick, rushing toward the shepherd with concern etched on her face. "He's hurt," she cried, noticing the blood on his muzzle. "Just a scratch," Reed assured her, though in truth the cut would likely require stitches. "He protected Carson here from a very bad person." Lily turned her attention to the rescued boy, her natural empathy overcoming her usual shyness. "I'm Lily. My dad and Officer Reed and Maverick have been looking for kids like you, to bring them home." Carson managed a shaky smile, the first sign that the shock might be beginning to ease. The dog knew exactly what to do, like he understood everything. "He does," Lily said with complete certainty. "He understands more than people think." As medical personnel arrived to examine Carson and tend to Maverick's injury, Reed found himself standing beside Nathan Thompson, both watching the children interact with the wounded shepherd. "Your daughter has a way with him," Reed observed. "With all of us, really." Nathan nodded, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. "She's always understood pain in others. After her mother died." He trailed off, then continued more softly. "That's why I couldn't stop this investigation, even when it put us at risk. Kelly, my wife, she would have never forgiven me for walking away when children were in danger." Reed thought of Sarah, Of the photo, Johnson had mentioned evidence that his sister had been one of the earliest victims of this operation. Some fights choose you. You don't choose them. Across the room, Lily had convinced the medical technician to allow her to help clean Maverick's wound, her small hands gentle as she worked alongside the professional. The shepherd, normally intolerant of medical treatment, lay perfectly still under her ministrations, his eyes never leaving her face. "What happens now?" Nathan asked, watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and lingering fear. Reed considered the question as Agent Reeves approached, her expression suggesting both satisfaction with the operation's outcome and awareness of how much work remained. "Now," she said, having overheard the question, "we follow every lead, every connection this investigation has uncovered. Wade's cooperation or lack thereof won't matter. We have enough electronic evidence to unravel the entire network." "And the children who have already been trafficked," Nathan pressed, the question that had driven his undercover work from the beginning. Reeves' expression softened slightly. "Recovery operations are already being planned. Some will be straightforward, legitimate-appearing adoptions that can be reversed once the fraud is proven. Others—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the grim reality that some children might never be recovered. As the conversation continued, Reed found his attention drawn back to Lily and Maverick. The shepherd had shifted position to rest his head in the girl's lap while the technician applied stitches to his muzzle, his eyes half closed in what appeared to be complete trust. In that moment of connection between a wounded war dog and a grieving child, Reed glimpsed something profound, the beginning of healing for both. And perhaps, he acknowledged, for himself as well. The path forward would not be easy for any of them, but watching Maverick's steady presence anchoring Lily through the chaos around them, Reed felt certainty solidify within him. Some partnerships were meant to be, forged in shared trauma and purpose. Tonight was just the beginning. The fluorescent lights of Portland Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across the waiting room where Reed sat, elbows on knees, staring at the linoleum floor. It had been 6 hours since the raid on the tunnel system, 4 since they'd brought Nathan Thompson in with a gunshot wound that no one had noticed during the operation. The injury had been discovered only when Nathan collapsed while giving his statement, blood seeping through his shirt from what appeared to be a ricochet that had caught him during the exchange of fire in the tunnels. Lily sat beside Reed, her small body curled against Maverick, who lay on the waiting room floor despite hospital regulations against animals. No one had the heart to enforce the rule, not after a nurse had witnessed the girl's breakdown when they wheeled her father into surgery. The shepherd had been the only thing that calmed her, pressing his weight against her trembling form until the sobs subsided into silent tears. "Will my dad die too?" she had asked Reed in the hushed tone of a child who already knew too much about loss. "The doctors are very good here," he'd answered, unable to offer false promises. "Your father is strong." Now they waited together, an unlikely trio bound by trauma and discovery. Maverick's muzzle sported fresh stitches, the fur around the wound shaved to reveal pink skin beneath. The shepherd hadn't left Lily's side since their arrival, his usual alertness focused entirely on the child as though she were the only assignment that mattered. Agent Reeves appeared at the entrance to the waiting area, her crisp suit rumpled from the long night. She approached with the measured steps of someone bearing news they were still determining how to deliver. "He's out of surgery," she said without preamble. "The bullet fractured a rib and nicked his lung, but they've repaired the damage. He's stable. Relief washed through Reed, but Lily's reaction was subdued, the cautious hope of a child who had learned that good news could be followed by devastating loss. "When can I see him?" she asked, her fingers buried in Maverick's fur. "Soon. He's in recovery now." Reeves settled into the chair across from them. "In the meantime, we need to discuss your situation, Lily. With your father in the hospital and the investigation ongoing, we need to arrange temporary placement for you." The girl's body tensed instantly. "I want to stay with Officer Reed and Maverick." The request caught Reed off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. The bond formed in crisis often created attachments that defied conventional relationships. "That's not standard protocol," Reeves began, but her expression suggested she was already considering alternatives to the system's usual rigid pathways. "He understands about my mom," Lily said quietly. "And Maverick keeps the bad dreams away." Reed found himself speaking before fully processing the implications. "I can take temporary custody. I have the space, and Maverick is already comfortable with her." He met Reeves's evaluating gaze. "Unless there are relatives who should be contacted. Her mother's parents are deceased, and Nathan has no siblings. There's an aunt in Michigan, but the relationship is distant." Reeves tapped her fingers against her knee, weighing options. "I'll need to clear it with family services, but given the circumstances and your position with the department, it might be the most stable option for now." Lily's posture relaxed slightly, though the worry remained etched in her features. "Can we bring Maverick to visit my dad when he wakes up?" "We'll work something out," Reed promised, knowing hospital rules would be another battle entirely. Reeves rose to make calls, leaving them alone again. Reed noticed Maverick's subtle shift. The shepherd had positioned himself to maintain physical contact with Lily, while simultaneously gaining a clear view of the waiting room entrance. Even wounded, he remained on duty. "He was someone else's dog first," Lily said unexpectedly, her gaze following Reed's to Maverick. "Before you?" Reed nodded. "His first handler was named Michael Collins, Staff Sergeant Collins. He died protecting people. Yes, he did. And Maverick couldn't save him, even though he tried really hard." Lily's insight was startling in its clarity. "That's why he has the bad dreams too. Dad says I have them because I couldn't save Mom in the car." The simple articulation of grief's complex burden left Reed momentarily speechless. He had never considered Maverick's night terrors, the whimpering, the twitching paws, as manifestations of survivor's guilt, though the parallel to human trauma was obvious once named. "I think you might be right," he said finally. "Sometimes trying our hardest isn't enough, and that's the hardest thing to accept." Lily nodded solemnly. "But it helps when someone understands." Her hand stroked Maverick's scarred leg with gentle precision. "That's why he knew I needed him when you brought him to school, and why he found Zoe and Carson." The theory that Maverick had somehow recognized a fellow survivor in Lily seemed both impossible and perfectly logical. Reed had worked with the shepherd for 3 years, yet this 8-year-old child had identified a connection he'd missed entirely. A commotion at the emergency entrance interrupted his thoughts. Medical personnel rushed toward incoming gurneys, their urgent commands cutting through the hospital's subdued atmosphere. Reed recognized the uniforms accompanying the new arrival's tactical gear from the FBI team that had been processing the southern tunnel access point. "Stay here with Maverick," he instructed Lily, moving toward the entrance to investigate. An agent he recognized from the briefing was speaking rapidly to the attending physician. Exposure to unknown chemical agent. 4 agents down. Symptoms include respiratory distress and disorientation. What happened? Reed asked, showing his badge to gain access to the conversation. The agent's expression was grim. Booby trap in a hidden room. Canister activated when the door was breached. Appears to be a dead man's switch designed to destroy evidence if the network was compromised. What kind of evidence? Records. Decades worth. From what we could see before the evacuation. Names, dates, destinations. The agent lowered his voice. And photographs, hundreds of them, going back to at least the early 90s. Sarah. The realization hit Reed with physical force. Evidence of his sister's fate had likely been in that room, answers to questions that had haunted his family for 30 years. Now potentially lost forever. Were you able to recover anything? Some digital media. It's being analyzed now with hazmat protocols. The agent checked his phone as it vibrated with an incoming message. I need to get back. They're bringing in specialized recovery teams. Reed returned to the waiting area, his mind racing with implications. If the trafficking network had maintained records for that long, the scope was far greater than they'd initially estimated. Not just Westlake Elementary, not just Portland, but potentially a multi-state operation spanning decades. Lily had fallen asleep against Maverick, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The shepherd remained alert, acknowledging Reed's return with a subtle ear movement, but maintaining his protective position beside the child. You knew, didn't you? Reed whispered to Maverick, settling back into his chair. You sensed there was more beneath that school than anyone realized. The shepherd's intelligent eyes held his gaze steadily, as though confirming the assessment. A doctor approached, still wearing surgical scrubs. Officer Reed, Mr. Thompson is asking for his daughter. Relief flooded through Reed. If Nathan was conscious and communicative, his prognosis was better than they'd feared. She's just fallen asleep. How is he doing? Stable but weak. The bullet caused significant blood loss, but we've transfused and repaired the damage. The doctor glanced at Maverick with professional disapproval. I should note that animals are not permitted in patient rooms. He's a police K-9, Reed countered, though technically Maverick was off duty due to his injury, and he's been crucial to the child's emotional stability. The doctor's expression softened slightly. I'll speak with the charge nurse. Given the circumstances, we might make an exception. He hesitated, then added more quietly, We've admitted 3 children from your operation tonight, all showing signs of sedation and psychological trauma. The oldest hasn't spoken a word since arrival. The news settled heavily on Reed's shoulders. They'd saved these children from immediate danger, but the road to recovery would be long and uncertain. How many others remained unaccounted for, still moving through the pipeline this organization had established? Let her sleep a little longer. Reed decided, looking at Lily's exhausted form. Her father will still be there when she wakes up. The doctor nodded and departed, leaving Reed alone with his thoughts and the steady presence of Maverick, who maintained his vigil beside the sleeping child. Outside the hospital windows, dawn was breaking over Portland, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that belied the darkness they had uncovered beneath Westlake Elementary. Reed watched the changing light and considered the bitter truth that had emerged from their investigation. The systems designed to protect children had been weaponized against them, with trusted figures, a principal, a police officer, using their positions to facilitate exploitation rather than safety. Yet, alongside this ugliness, he had witnessed extraordinary courage, a father risking everything to find missing children, a custodian finally speaking truth after decades of silence, a traumatized K-9 finding renewed purpose, and an 8-year-old girl whose perception cut through pretense to the heart of both human and canine suffering. Lily stirred, blinking awake with the momentary confusion of a child in unfamiliar surroundings. "Is my dad okay?" she asked immediately, the fear returning to her eyes. "He's awake and asking for you," Reed told her, offering his hand. "Ready to see him?" She nodded, her other hand automatically finding Maverick's fur as the shepherd rose with her. Together, they made their way toward Nathan's room, a wounded trio united by the trauma they had endured and the healing they had yet to begin. What none of them could know was that the true extent of the conspiracy was still unfolding, with tendrils reaching further than they had imagined, and that the evidence partially destroyed in the tunnel system would eventually reveal connections to individuals whose power and influence would make the coming confrontation far more dangerous than the one they had just survived. 3 days after the raid on Westlake Elementary, Reed sat in an FBI debriefing room surrounded by evidence boards and timeline charts that documented a trafficking operation far more extensive than initially believed. Agent Reeves stood at the front, addressing a team that had grown to include federal prosecutors, forensic accountants, and child welfare specialists. "The records recovered from the compromised evidence room have been partially restored," she explained, indicating a digital display of recovered documents. "Despite the chemical agent deployed, our technical team salvaged approximately 60% of the physical evidence and nearly 80% of digital files." Reed leaned forward, studying the network diagram that showed connections between schools, administrators, and what appeared to be shell companies across 5 states. At the center was a corporate entity called Educational Futures Consulting, which had provided administrative software to over 30 school districts since 1987. This software gave them access to student records, family backgrounds, socioeconomic indicators. Reeves continued, "They used data mining to identify vulnerable children, those with minimal family connections, unstable home situations, or histories that made them unlikely to be intensively searched for if they disappeared." A forensic accountant took over, explaining the financial architecture that had concealed millions in transactions disguised as educational consulting fees, facility improvements, and administrative training. Money had flowed through legitimate-appearing channels before disappearing into offshore accounts. Reed listened with growing unease as the true scope of the operation became clear. This wasn't just Wade Bennett and Principal Whitman using their positions opportunistically. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had operated for decades with corporate infrastructure, using schools as both hunting grounds and transit points. "What about the children?" he asked during a pause in the presentation. "How many are we talking about?" Reeves's expression tightened. "Based on the recovered records, we've identified 147 children processed through this network since 1990. Of those, 62 were placed through fraudulent adoptions that appeared legitimate on paper. Those will be our first recovery priority. The remaining cases—" She hesitated. "Many were moved internationally, primarily to Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia." The implication hung heavily in the air. Those children would be far more difficult to locate, if they could be found at all. "There's something else you should know. Officer Reed." Reeves nodded to an assistant who handed her a file. "Among the recovered photographs, we found this." She placed a slightly damaged photograph on the table. Despite the chemical degradation along one edge, the image was clear enough. A young girl, perhaps 7 years old, with familiar features that struck Reed like a physical blow. Sarah, his sister, photographed inside what appeared to be one of the tunnels beneath Westlake. The timestamp in the corner read 06/14/1992, 3 days after her disappearance. Reed's hand trembled slightly as he touched the edge of the photograph. She was processed through Westlake. It appears so. The accompanying documentation indicates she was one of their early acquisitions. There's a notation about heightened risk due to her father's position in law enforcement. Reeves's voice softened. "I'm sorry. Marcus, we're prioritizing her file in the recovery investigation. But given the time frame..." She didn't need to finish. After 30 years, the chances of finding Sarah alive were minimal. The best they could hope for was closure, finally knowing what had happened after she disappeared from that playground decades ago. "There's more," Reeves continued after giving Reed a moment to process. "Wade Bennett didn't create this operation. He was recruited into it approximately 8 years ago. His handler appears to be someone with significant influence in the Portland legal system." She turned to a photograph on the evidence board, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed. Judge William Hargrove, 27 years on the bench, considered for the state Supreme Court twice. His position allowed him to quash investigations, suppress evidence, and ensure any cases that did reach the judicial system were dismissed or diverted. The revelation sent murmurs through the assembled team. Hargrove was a respected figure in Portland's legal community, known for his Children's Advocacy Foundation and philanthropic work. "The perfect cover," Reed observed bitterly. "A public champion for the very children he was exploiting." "Precisely. And he's not the only high-profile figure implicated. We've identified connections to 2 state legislators, a deputy superintendent of education, and several prominent business leaders." Reeves closed the file. "Which is why this operation is now classified at the highest level. The individuals involved have resources, influence, and powerful incentives to silence this investigation." Reed thought of Nathan Thompson, still recovering in the hospital with Lily rarely leaving his side. Of Maverick, whose wounds were healing but who remained hypervigilant whenever anyone besides Reed or Lily approached. Of the rescued children, some reunited with desperate parents, others placed in specialized therapeutic facilities to address traumas too severe for standard foster care. "What happens next?" he asked. "We build the case methodically, working from the lower levels up to the key orchestrators. Wade Bennett is cooperating minimally, but Principal Whitman has provided substantial information in exchange for consideration during sentencing." Reeves surveyed the room. "Meanwhile, we've implemented protective measures for key witnesses, including the Thompson family." The briefing concluded with assignment updates and security protocols. As the room cleared, Reed remained seated, the photograph of his sister still before him. Reeves lingered, understanding his need for a private moment. "She looks like you," she observed quietly. "Same determined expression." Reed nodded, unable to speak past the constriction in his throat. Sarah had been missing for 30 years longer than she had been alive, yet the wound remained unhealed. a void around which his family had constructed their lives. His father had died, still searching. His mother had retreated into a shell of religious devotion. And Reed had channeled everything into law enforcement, driven by questions that now might finally have answers. "Take it," Reeves said, indicating the photograph. "It's been digitally preserved for evidence. This copy should be with family." Reed carefully placed the image in his wallet before rising to leave. "I should check on Lily and Nathan. They're being moved to a secure location tomorrow," Reeves informed him. "Nathan's recovery is progressing well enough for transport. You and Maverick are cleared to accompany them, given your established relationship with the child." The established relationship was a clinical description for what had developed between Reed, Maverick, and Lily Thompson. In the days since the raid, he had become her de facto guardian, bringing her to visit Nathan daily while providing the stability she desperately needed. Maverick had become her constant companion, the shepherd's protective instincts fully engaged by the child's vulnerability. At the hospital, Reed found Lily where he expected, curled in a chair beside her father's bed, reading aloud from a book while Maverick lay at her feet. An FBI agent stood discreetly outside the door, part of the protection detail assigned to the family. Nathan looked up as Reed entered, his color better than the previous day. "Officer Reed, good timing. Lily was just finishing this chapter." "I can come back," Reed offered, but Lily was already closing the book. "It's okay. We can finish later." She climbed down from the chair to greet Maverick, who received her attention with dignified patience. "Did you find more bad guys today?" The directness of children never failed to catch Reed off guard. "We're working on it. There are quite a few people involved in what happened at your school." Nathan's expression darkened. "How high does it go?" Reed glanced at Lily, weighing how much to reveal in her presence. "It's okay," Nathan assured him. "She knows this isn't a simple case. Honesty has been our policy since her mother died." Reed nodded, respecting the parenting choice while still moderating his response. "We've identified connections to the judicial system and state government. The operation was much larger than we initially thought." "Judge Hargrove," Nathan said with certainty, surprising Reed. "I'd begun to suspect his involvement before everything happened. His foundation provided enrichment grants to schools where children later disappeared. You've been thorough in your investigation." Reed acknowledged, impressed by Thompson's research despite his civilian status. "My daughter's classmate in Tacoma was taken by this network," Nathan replied, his voice hardening. "Emily Prescott, 8 years old, raised by her grandmother who was in early-stage dementia. Perfect target for them, vulnerable. Minimal advocacy, easily explained absence. When the police dismissed it as a family situation, I started looking myself." Lily had settled on the floor with Maverick during this exchange, seemingly absorbed in a game of teaching the shepherd to offer his paw on command. But Reed noticed how her ears tracked the adult conversation. She was processing everything, filing away information in that perceptive mind. "Agent Reeves says you're being moved tomorrow," Reed said, changing the subject slightly. "A safe house until the initial arrests are completed." Nathan nodded. "They briefed me this morning, somewhere in Washington State, near the Olympic Peninsula." He hesitated. "They mentioned you and Maverick would be accompanying us. If that's acceptable to you. Lily seems to have bonded with Maverick, and my K-9 experience makes me a logical security addition." Reed kept his tone professional, though the arrangement had more emotional implications than he was admitting. "More than acceptable," Nathan said with evident relief. "You're the only officer she trusts right now. And frankly, after discovering how deeply law enforcement was compromised, I share her caution." Before Reed could respond, Maverick suddenly stiffened, his attention fixing on the doorway with the alertness that signaled potential threat assessment. Seconds later, the door opened to admit a nurse Reed didn't recognize, pushing a medication cart. "Time for pain management," she announced cheerfully, reaching for Nathan's chart. Something in Maverick's continued tension triggered Reed's instincts. "ID badge, please," he requested, positioning himself between the nurse and Nathan's bed. The woman's smile never faltered as she displayed her hospital credentials, Maureen Lister, RN, but Maverick's low growl deepened. "Is there a problem?" she asked, hand hovering near the medication drawer. Reed studied the badge, which appeared authentic, then glanced at the medication chart on the wall. "Mr. Thompson isn't due for pain management for another 2 hours." A flicker of calculation crossed the woman's features before smoothing into professional concern. "There must be a scheduling error. I'll double-check with the charge nurse." She turned to leave, movements casual but purposeful. When the FBI agent appeared in the doorway, "Is everything all right? Officer Reed, can you verify this nurse's assignment to Mr. Thompson's care?" Reed requested, maintaining his position between the woman and the bed. What happened next occurred with stunning speed. The pretend nurse drove the medication cart into the FBI agent, simultaneously producing a syringe from her pocket. Reed lunged forward as Maverick launched into action, the shepherd's training enabling him to target the threat with precision despite his healing wounds. The woman screamed as Maverick's jaws closed around her wrist, forcing her to drop the syringe. Reed secured her other arm, pinning her against the wall as the FBI agent recovered and drew his weapon. "Federal agent, don't move," he commanded, though the warning was unnecessary with Maverick maintaining his hold. Lily had retreated to her father's side, Nathan's arm wrapped protectively around her, despite the pain evident in his face from the sudden movement. "Who sent you?" he demanded of the woman. The false nurse maintained her silence, but her eyes, cold and calculating despite the situation, told Reed everything he needed to know. This wasn't a random attack or opportunistic attempt. This was a professional, sent to eliminate a key witness before he could testify. "Secure the floor," Reed instructed the agent, "and contact Reeves immediately. The safe house timeline needs to be accelerated." As hospital security arrived and the woman was taken into custody, Reed noticed something that sent a chill through him, a small tattoo on the inside of the woman's wrist, partially obscured by Maverick's bite, but still recognizable, a stylized key crossed with a quill. The same symbol had appeared on documents recovered from the tunnel system, identified as the mark of the network's elite enforcement team. They had already begun eliminating liabilities. Hours later, after Nathan and Lily had been secretly transferred to a temporary secure location within the hospital complex, Reed sat alone in an empty waiting room, Maverick alert at his feet. The shepherd had refused food since the incident, maintaining operational vigilance despite Reed's attempts to ease him into rest mode. "You did good work today," Reed told him quietly, rubbing the spot behind his ears that usually brought comfort. "Above and beyond." Maverick acknowledged the praise with a subtle shift of his ears, but maintained his watchful posture, periodically scanning the room's entry points. Reed's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Reeves. Attempted infiltration at 3 hospitals today, all targeting witnesses, expediting all protective transfers. Prepare for 0500 departure. The message confirmed his worst fears. The network had resources to mount simultaneous operations targeting witnesses across multiple locations. They were organized, informed, and clearly had access to internal information about the investigation, which meant no one, not even within the FBI operation, could be fully trusted. Reed deleted the message and leaned back, calculating risks and contingencies while Maverick maintained his silent vigil. Tomorrow would begin a new phase of this unfolding nightmare, with the lives of Nathan and Lily Thompson directly in their hands. And somewhere within the evidence still being processed was the truth about Sarah, a truth he had sought for 30 years, now tantalizingly within reach, but shadowed by the same powerful forces that had taken her in the first place. Outside the window, Portland's lights glittered against the night sky, beautiful and oblivious to the darkness that had operated beneath its surface for decades. Reed watched a plane's lights cross the horizon and made a silent promise to his sister, to Lily, to all the children whose lives had been destroyed by this network. No matter how high it reached, no matter who was implicated, he would see this through to the end. 3 months after the discovery beneath Westlake Elementary, autumn painted the Olympic Peninsula in fiery hues of red and gold. The safe house, a renovated forest ranger's cabin nestled among towering cedars, had become home to an unlikely family forged in trauma and healing. Reed stood on the wraparound porch, coffee mug warming his hands against the morning chill as he watched Lily and Maverick exploring the edge of the clearing, the girl pointing out interesting finds to the attentive shepherd. Maverick moved with only the slightest hint of stiffness from his healed injuries, his rehabilitation aided by daily walks with Lily through the surrounding forest. The shepherd's transformation over these months had been remarkable, from a canine defined by his working function to a more balanced creature who could transition between vigilant protector and gentle companion. With Lily, he displayed a patience Reed had never witnessed before, tolerating her impromptu grooming sessions and listening with pricked ears to her stories as though understanding every word. "They're good for each other," Nathan Thompson said, joining Reed on the porch. His recovery had been slower than the doctors initially predicted, the bullet's damage compounded by stress and exhaustion from his months of undercover work. But the gaunt pallor had finally given way to healthier color, and he moved with increasing strength each day. "She's good for all of us," Reed replied, thinking of how Lily's perceptive kindness had created a bridge between 2 wounded men who might otherwise have maintained professional distance. Nathan nodded toward the forest edge where Lily was now showing Maverick a particularly interesting pine cone. The prosecutor called again this morning. Grand jury indictments are coming down today, 37 defendants in the first wave, including Judge Hargrove and State Senator Mercer. And the second wave, international warrants, cooperation with Interpol. They've identified receiving operations in 6 countries. Nathan's expression darkened. Though the trail goes cold for the earliest cases, including Sarah. The unspoken knowledge hung between them that Reed's sister had been among the first children trafficked through this network, her case now decades old with minimal documentary evidence surviving. Agent Reeves also sent the final security assessment. Nathan continued. They believe the immediate threat has diminished with the key operatives in custody. will be relocated to permanent witness protection after the preliminary hearings. But he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The program doesn't typically accommodate non-family attachments. Reed understood the implication. Once Nathan and Lily entered witness protection, their connection to Reed and Maverick would be severed. No contact, no information, a complete break to ensure their safety. "When?" Reed asked, his voice rougher than intended. "6 weeks, after I testify in the preliminary hearings." Nathan studied his coffee, avoiding eye contact. "Lily doesn't know yet. I've been trying to find the right moment." The thought of explaining to Lily that Maverick, her constant companion through nightmares, anxiety attacks, and the slow rebuilding of trust, would suddenly disappear from her life seemed cruel beyond measure. Yet witness protection protocols existed for good reason, particularly with a network as far-reaching as the one they had uncovered. "There might be alternatives," Reed suggested. "My resignation from the force has been processed. I could potentially apply for the program as an affiliated protective asset." The idea had been forming in Reed's mind for weeks, stepping away from law enforcement entirely to remain connected to the makeshift family that had formed in the aftermath of Westlake. His resignation had been necessary regardless, as the investigation had revealed corruption extending into the Portland Police Department's highest ranks. The department was now under federal oversight, with nearly a quarter of its senior leadership suspended or under investigation. Nathan looked surprised. "You'd consider that giving up your identity, your history?" Reed watched Lily kneeling beside Maverick, whispering something in the shepherd's ear. "There are different kinds of history, different kinds of identity." He thought of Sarah, of the 3 decades spent searching. Sometimes you have to let go of one past to build a different future. Inside the cabin, the secure phone line rang the daily check-in from the federal marshal assigned to their case. Nathan went to answer while Reed remained on the porch, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this quiet forest sanctuary. The investigation had become the largest child trafficking case in Pacific Northwest history, with ramifications still unfolding across multiple jurisdictions. Reed had spent weeks in debriefings, providing testimony that would form the foundation for dozens of prosecutions. But as the case expanded, he had found himself increasingly drawn to the human center of the storm, Nathan's quiet determination to protect his daughter while still fighting for justice, and Lily's remarkable resilience in the face of compounded trauma. When the option for extended protective duty at the safe house had been offered, Reed had accepted immediately, recognizing that his connection to the Thompsons had evolved beyond professional responsibility. Maverick's bond with Lily had only deepened his conviction that they belonged with this improvised family. Nathan returned from the phone call, his expression unreadable. "That was Marshal Donnelly. There's been a development." Reed tensed, automatically scanning the tree line where Lily and Maverick were now heading back toward the cabin. "What kind of development?" "They found Sarah." The words hit Reed like a physical blow. "What? Where?" "Brussels, working as an art teacher under the name Claire Bertrand. She was identified through the facial recognition database they've been running against the recovered documentation." Nathan placed a steadying hand on Reed's shoulder. "She's alive." "Marcus." The world seemed to tilt beneath Reed's feet as 30 years of grief, searching, and unanswered questions collapsed into a single moment of impossible reality. Sarah alive, living under another name in another country, perhaps with no memory of her life before the abduction, but alive. Does she know about me? About our parents? The approach is being handled carefully by specialists in recovered trafficking victims. These cases are complicated. Many victims develop protective psychological barriers around their early memories. Nathan's voice was gentle. But Donnelly says she's agreed to meet with you. In Brussels. Neutral territory. Reed sank onto the porch step, overwhelmed. Their parents had died never knowing his father from heart failure accelerated by stress and grief. His mother from cancer she'd dismissed as unimportant compared to the search for her daughter. And now, after they were gone, the miracle they had prayed for had finally materialized. Lily and Maverick reached the cabin, the girl's cheeks flushed with exercise and autumn air. She immediately sensed the charged atmosphere, her perceptive gaze moving between the two men. "What happened?" she asked, instinctively placing her hand on Maverick's head for security. Reed looked up, realizing his cheeks were wet with unnoticed tears. "They found my sister," he said simply. "The one who disappeared when I was a boy." Lily's eyes widened with understanding beyond her years. "Like the children from the tunnels." "Yes, exactly like that." She crossed to him without hesitation, small arms wrapping around his neck in a fierce hug that conveyed more compassion than words could express. Maverick pressed against his side, the shepherd's steady presence grounding him in this moment of overwhelming emotion. Over Lily's shoulder, Reed met Nathan's gaze. Seeing in it the reflection of his own realization, the healing they had begun in this forest sanctuary wasn't ending, it was expanding, creating space for one more wounded soul to find her way home. "Will she come here?" Lily asked, pulling back to search Reed's face. "Your sister." "I don't know yet. It's complicated, but I'm going to see her soon." Lily nodded with the certainty of a child who believed in restoration despite experiencing profound loss. "Maverick can help her too. He knows how to find people who are lost." The simple faith in her voice released something tightly coiled in Reed's chest, a tension he'd carried so long it had become part of his identity. In its place bloomed a cautious hope, nurtured by this unlikely family that had formed from the darkness beneath Westlake Elementary. As the autumn sun broke through morning clouds, casting dappled light across the porch where they gathered, Reed found himself believing in possibilities that would have seemed impossible just months before. Whatever came next, witness protection, reunion with Sarah, the ongoing pursuit of justice, they would face it together, their bonds forged in the crucible of trauma but strengthened by something more powerful than the forces that had tried to destroy them. The evil beneath the school had been exposed to light, and in that light, healing had begun to grow. As the truth emerged from beneath Westlake Elementary, we're reminded that evil often hides in plain sight, sometimes wearing the faces we're taught to trust. For those of us who raised children in communities we believed safe, who taught them to respect authority and seek help from teachers and police, this story strikes a particularly painful chord. We remember the missing children on milk cartons, the neighborhood watches we formed, the extra precautions we took while still believing these tragedies happened elsewhere, to other families. Maverick's journey from wounded warrior to healing guardian mirrors our own life passages, carrying invisible scars, finding unexpected purpose in our later years, forming connections